Lucy Chen had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. Maybe it came from working in customer service for so long. Or maybe it was just the way her mom had raised her. Either way, as she walked down Maple Street that Tuesday evening, her eyes caught the small glint of metal on the sidewalk that most people would have stepped right over. The October air was crisp, and Lucy pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. She was already running 5 minutes late for her evening shift at Miller's Diner, but something about that little flash of light made her stop. Her sneakers squeaked against the damp pavement as she bent down to get a closer look. It was a keychain. Not just any keychain, though. This one was obviously special to someone. The main piece was a small silver-colored disc about the size of a quarter, with words engraved on it. Lucy squinted in the fading daylight and felt her heart do a little flip when she read what it said. World's Best Dad. The engraving was slightly worn, like it had been rubbed by loving fingers countless times. Attached to the disc were several keys. A car key that looked like it belonged to something nice, a couple of house keys, and what appeared to be some kind of office access cards on a separate ring. The whole thing had that lived-in look that comes from being carried everywhere, every day. Lucy stood up slowly, turning the keychain over in her palm. On the back of the disc, in much smaller letters, were the words, "Love, Sophie," in what looked like a child's careful handwriting that had been engraved to make it permanent. "Oh no," Lucy whispered to herself. Somewhere out there, a dad was probably panicking right about now, and somewhere else, a little girl named Sophie was going to be heartbroken if her special gift to her father was gone forever. Lucy had been that little girl once. She remembered spending her allowance money at age 7 to buy her own dad a coffee mug that said "World's Greatest Father" from the dollar store. She'd been so proud of that gift even though the letters started peeling off after a few washes. Her dad had used that mug every morning until it finally broke, and even then he'd kept the pieces in his desk drawer. That was back when things were simpler, before her parents' divorce, before her dad moved across the country for work. The memory made her chest tight, but it also made her more determined. This keychain was going back to its owner no matter what it took. She glanced at her phone. Now she was 8 minutes late, and her manager at the diner wasn't exactly the understanding type. Tony had already given her 2 warnings this month about punctuality, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. Between the diner work and her morning shifts at the coffee shop, she was just barely making ends meet. Her student loans weren't going to pay themselves, and her rent had gone up again last month. But as Lucy looked at the keychain again, she knew she couldn't just walk away. What if it was her dad's keychain? What if it was her gift from when she was Sophie's age? She'd want someone to take the time to return it. Lucy carefully slipped the keychain into the front pocket of her jeans, making sure the zipper was closed tight. She'd figure out how to find the owner later. Right now, she needed to get to work before Tony decided he'd had enough of her excuses. The diner was busy when she finally pushed through the glass doors. The dinner rush was in full swing, and Lucy could see Tony's disapproving look from across the room as she quickly tied her apron around her waist and grabbed an order pad. "You're late." "Chen," Tony called out from behind the register. "I know, I'm sorry." There was, "Save it. Table 6 is still waiting for their drinks." Lucy nodded and got to work, but all through her shift she kept thinking about the keychain in her pocket. During her break, she pulled it out and examined it more carefully under the bright fluorescent lights of the diner's back room. The craftsmanship was nice, not expensive exactly, but definitely not cheap either. Someone had put thought into this gift. She tried to imagine what Sophie looked like, probably around 8 or 9 based on the handwriting, maybe with pigtails and missing front teeth, so proud of herself for picking out the perfect gift for her dad. Lucy smiled at the thought, even though it made her miss her own childhood. The access cards attached to the keychain were interesting too. They looked official, like the kind you'd need to get into an office building or maybe a parking garage. There was no company name visible, but they definitely weren't the simple key cards you'd get for a small business. As Lucy wiped down tables and served late-night coffee to truckers and night shift workers, she found herself making plans. Tomorrow was her day off from both jobs, the first real day off she'd had in 3 weeks. She'd use the time to try to find the keychain's owner. She could post on the neighborhood Facebook groups. Her friend Jess was always sharing posts about lost pets and found items on there. Maybe she could put up some flyers around the area where she'd found it, though she'd have to be careful not to give away too many details. She'd learned that lesson when she'd tried to return a lost wallet last year and had 3 different people try to claim it. By the time her shift ended at 11, Lucy had a whole plan worked out. She'd start first thing in the morning and she wouldn't stop until she found Sophie's dad. It was the right thing to do, and Lucy had been raised to do the right thing even when it wasn't easy. Walking home through the quiet streets, Lucy patted her pocket to make sure the keychain was still there. Tomorrow she was going to make a little girl very happy by giving her dad back his most precious possession. She didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness was about to change her entire life in ways she never could have imagined. Lucy woke up Wednesday morning with the keychain on her nightstand, right next to her phone where she'd placed it the night before. The world's best dad inscription caught the morning sunlight streaming through her small apartment window, and she felt that same tug in her chest she'd felt when she first found it. Today was the day she'd find Sophie's father. She made herself a quick cup of instant coffee and opened her laptop. The old thing took forever to boot up, but it was all she could afford right now. While she waited, she examined the keychain one more time, taking photos from different angles. She'd need pictures for her posts, but she'd have to be smart about what she showed. Too many details and she'd get fake claimants. Too few and the real owner might not recognize his own keys. Her first stop was the Riverside Community Facebook group. Lucy had joined it when she first moved to the neighborhood 2 years ago, mostly to find out about local events and occasionally sell textbooks. She crafted her post carefully. Found a keychain on Maple Street yesterday evening. Has sentimental value. Looks like a gift from a child to their parent. If you've lost something like this, please message me with a detailed description. Will only return to the rightful owner. She attached one photo showing just the keys and access cards, keeping the engraved disc hidden. Within minutes, her phone started buzzing with comments and private messages. The first message came from someone claiming they'd lost car keys near the grocery store. Wrong area entirely. Then a woman insisted the keychain belonged to her husband, but when Lucy asked for details, she couldn't describe the engraving. By noon, Lucy had received 12 messages, but none of them seemed legitimate. This was going to be harder than she thought. After lunch, Lucy decided to try a different approach. She walked back to the exact spot where she'd found the keychain and started looking around more carefully. Maybe there were clues she'd missed in the fading light yesterday evening. The area was busy during the day. Maple Street ran right through the heart of the neighborhood, connecting the residential area to the small business district. There was a corner market, a dry cleaner, a small accounting office, and a few other shops. Any one of these could have been where the owner was heading when he dropped his keys. Lucy started with the corner market. The elderly man behind the counter, who everyone called Pop, knew almost everyone in the neighborhood. A keychain, you say? Pop adjusted his glasses and leaned over the counter. What did it look like? Lucy described it vaguely, mentioning only that it seemed like a Father's Day gift. Pop scratched his chin thoughtfully. Could be anyone, really. A lot of dads come through here. But I tell you what, put up a little flyer on my bulletin board there. Someone's bound to see it. Lucy spent the rest of the afternoon making flyers on the library's free computers and printer. She kept the description general but added her phone number and email. By evening, she'd posted them at the market, the dry cleaner, the coffee shop where she worked mornings, and several other local businesses. Thursday brought more false leads. A man called claiming he'd lost his keys in the area. But when Lucy asked about the keychain, he described something completely different. Another person insisted they'd lost a World's Best Mom keychain, clearly not even listening to the details in her post. The worst part was seeing how desperate some people were. A woman called in tears saying she'd lost her deceased husband's keys and was hoping against hope that Lucy had found them. Lucy's heart broke having to tell her no. That wasn't what she'd found. It made her even more determined to return this keychain to its rightful owner. By Friday morning, Lucy was starting to worry. What if the owner didn't use social media? What if he hadn't seen her flyers? Had if he'd already given up and gotten new keys made? She was refilling the coffee dispensers during the morning rush at Brewster's Coffee when her phone buzzed. Another message. Lucy almost ignored it. She'd gotten so many fake responses that she was losing hope. But something made her check this one. Hi, I think you might have found my keychain. Lost it Tuesday evening walking on Maple Street. It's a silver disc with an engraving from my daughter. Has my car key and office access cards. Really hoping you still have it. It means everything to me. Lucy's heart started racing. This sounded different from the others. More specific, but not too specific. And Tuesday evening, that matched exactly when she'd found it. She stepped into the back room to call the number he'd provided. A man answered on the second ring. Hello?
Hi, this is Lucy. You responded to my post about the found keychain?
Yes, thank you so much for calling back. I've been looking everywhere for it. His voice sounded genuinely stressed but relieved too. Lucy could hear what sounded like office noise in the background. Can you describe it in detail for me? She asked. I've had a lot of people trying to claim it who clearly haven't lost anything. Of course. It's a circular metal disc, silver-colored, about the size of a quarter. It says World's Best Dad on one side, and on the back it has Love Sophie in my daughter's handwriting. She made it for me last Father's Day. I never go anywhere without it. Lucy felt tears prick her eyes. This was him. This was definitely Sophie's dad. Where would you like to meet? She asked. Wherever is convenient for you. I can't thank you enough for this. That keychain. It's the most important thing I own. They arranged to meet at Brewster's Coffee the next morning. Lucy would be working, but her manager wouldn't mind if she took a quick break to return lost property. The man, he'd said his name was Tom, promised to be there at 9 sharp. That night, Lucy cleaned the keychain gently with a soft cloth, making sure it looked as good as possible for its return. She thought about Sophie, probably worried sick that her special gift to her dad was gone forever. Tomorrow, Lucy was going to be able to fix that. Tomorrow, she was going to make a little girl and her father very happy. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to open a door to opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes in our lives, and Lucy was about to discover that truth firsthand. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Lucy got to Brewster's Coffee 30 minutes early, partly because she was excited about returning the keychain and partly because she was nervous. What if this Tom person wasn't who he claimed to be? What if she'd made a mistake? She went through her opening routine, grinding beans, setting up the espresso machine, arranging the pastries in the display case. Her coworker Jake wouldn't arrive until 10, so the morning rush was all hers. But that was fine. It would give her a chance to talk with Tom privately when he arrived. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door chimed and a man walked in. Lucy knew immediately it was him. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it a few times already that morning. He wore a business suit that was nice but not flashy, and there was something tired around his eyes. But more than anything, there was relief written all over his face when he spotted Lucy behind the counter. "Lucy," he asked, walking up with quick steps. "That's me. You must be Tom." "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't even begin to tell you what this means to me." Lucy reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the keychain. The moment Tom saw it, his whole face changed. His shoulders dropped like he'd been carrying a heavy weight, and Lucy could swear she saw his eyes get a little watery. "Oh my God," he whispered, taking it gently from her hands. "Sophie's been asking me about this every day. I told her I'd find it, but honestly I was starting to think it was gone forever." He turned the disc over in his palm, running his thumb over the engraved words just like Lucy had imagined someone doing countless times before. She saved up her allowance for 2 months to buy this for me. Took 3 trips to the engraving store because she kept changing her mind about what she wanted it to say. Lucy felt that familiar warmth in her chest. This was exactly why she'd spent 3 days searching for the owner. This moment right here, seeing a father reunited with his daughter's gift. "Can I buy you a coffee?" Lucy asked. "I mean, I know I work here, but I'd like to make you one." "On the house," Tom looked surprised. "You don't have to do that. You've already done so much. I want to. What do you drink?" "Just black coffee. Simple." As Lucy prepared his drink, Tom settled onto one of the stools at the counter. The morning rush hadn't started yet, so they had the place mostly to themselves except for Mrs. Patterson in the corner, reading her newspaper like she did every Saturday. "So how did you end up finding it so quickly?" Tom asked. "I posted on a few neighborhood groups but didn't get any responses. I found it Tuesday evening on Maple Street right near the corner market. Posted everywhere I could think of but got a lot of fake responses before yours came through." Tom shook his head. "I can't believe people would try to claim something that doesn't belong to them. You'd be surprised. I returned a lost wallet once and had 3 different people try to claim it. Lucy slid his coffee across the counter. But your message was different. You knew exactly what it was. Sophie made sure I'd never forget. She quizzed me on what it said for weeks after she gave it to me. He took a sip of the coffee and his eyebrows went up. This is really good, thanks. I've been working here for about 6 months. Still learning, but I love the coffee part of the job. Just the coffee part? Lucy laughed. Well, dealing with cranky people before they've had their caffeine isn't exactly my favorite thing in the world. Tom smiled, and Lucy noticed it was the first time he'd really relaxed since walking in. I imagine that takes patience, a lot of patience, but it's honest work, and it pays the bills. Mostly. She hadn't meant to add that last part, but it slipped out. Tom's expression grew more interested rather than uncomfortable, which surprised her. Mostly? Oh, it's nothing dramatic. I just work a couple of jobs right now, here in the mornings and at Miller's Diner most evenings, trying to pay off student loans while I finish school. What are you studying? Business administration. I know, it sounds boring. But I've got this idea. Lucy paused. She wasn't used to talking about her dreams with customers, especially ones she'd just met. But something about Tom made her want to continue. I want to open a community center, somewhere kids can go after school, get help with homework, learn new skills. Maybe their parents could take classes too. Computer skills, English, job training, that kind of thing. Tom leaned forward slightly. That's not boring at all. That sounds incredible. What gave you the idea? I grew up in a neighborhood that could have really used something like that. My mom worked 2 jobs and I spent a lot of time alone after school. I was lucky. I stayed out of trouble and did okay in school. But a lot of kids don't have that luck. And you want to change that for other kids. Exactly. Lucy felt her cheeks warm. She couldn't believe she was sharing all this with a stranger. Sorry, I don't usually talk people's ears off about my life plans. Don't apologize. It's refreshing to meet someone with real passion for helping others. How close are you to finishing your degree? I should graduate next spring if I can keep up with the course load. The online classes are flexible, which helps with the work schedule, but some semesters are tougher than others. Tom nodded thoughtfully. And then you'll start working on the community center? That's the plan, though I'll need to figure out funding and location and about 1 million other things. It's a big dream for someone who can barely afford her own rent sometimes. The bell above the door chimed as a few more customers came in. Lucy glanced over and saw the beginning of the Saturday morning rush starting to form. I should probably get back to work, she said, but I'm so glad I could return your keychain. Sophie's going to be so happy. She's going to scream with joy, Tom said, standing up from his stool. I can't wait to see her face. He pulled out his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the counter. Oh no, the coffee was free, Lucy protested. The coffee was free. That's for the service of returning something that can't be replaced. Tom's voice was firm but kind, and for listening to a stressed-out dad ramble about his daughter. You didn't ramble, and $20 is way too much for 1 cup of coffee. It's not nearly enough for what you've done, Tom said. You went out of your way to help a complete stranger. That means more than you know. Before Lucy could argue further, he was heading for the door. Take care of yourself, Lucy. And don't give up on that community center dream. The world needs more people like you. The door chimed behind him, leaving Lucy staring at the $20 bill on the counter. That was more than she usually made in tips during an entire shift. She looked out the window and watched Tom walking away, talking animatedly on his phone. Probably calling Sophie to tell her the good news. As the morning rush picked up pace, Lucy found herself smiling while she worked. It felt good to have helped someone, but more than that, it felt good to have met someone who actually listened when she talked about her dreams. Most people either looked bored or changed the subject when she mentioned the community center. Tom had seemed genuinely interested, just a grateful father, she thought to herself as she steamed milk for another customer's latte. But she couldn't shake the feeling that their conversation had meant something more than just a simple thank you. 2 weeks had passed since Lucy returned the keychain to Tom, and life had settled back into its usual rhythm of early morning coffee shifts and late-night diner work. She'd thought about him a few times, wondering how Sophie had reacted when he showed up with her special gift. But mostly the encounter had faded into the background of her busy days, until that Tuesday morning when everything changed. Lucy was working the opening shift at Brewster's. going through the motions of setting up for another day. The morning regulars were starting to filter in. Mr. Hendricks with his usual large black coffee, Mrs. Chen, who always ordered a cappuccino with extra foam, and Robert, the accountant from down the street who liked his espresso shots over ice. Robert was one of those customers who always brought something to read while he drank his coffee. Sometimes it was the newspaper, sometimes a book, but today he'd brought a local business magazine. He spread it out on the counter while Lucy prepared his drink, and she couldn't help but glance at it as she worked. "Interesting stuff in there today?" she asked, making conversation while she pulled his espresso shots. "Oh, you know how it is. Local business news, profiles of successful people, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's actually pretty inspiring." Robert flipped through a few pages. "There's this article about community development that caught my eye. About how local businesses can make a real difference in neighborhoods." Lucy perked up at that. "Really? That sounds right up my alley. You should take a look when I'm done. It's all about this CEO who's been funding community programs around the city. Pretty amazing what some people do with their success." Robert settled into his usual corner table, leaving the magazine folded open on the counter. Lucy was curious, but the morning rush was picking up and she didn't have time to read anything beyond a quick glance at the headlines. It wasn't until her break at 10:30 that she finally had a chance to sit down with the magazine. She poured herself a coffee and flipped to the article Robert had mentioned. The headline read, "Building Communities' Local CEO's Mission to Give Back." Lucy started reading with mild interest. The article was about community development and corporate responsibility, exactly the kind of thing that appealed to her. But as she read further, something started to feel familiar. The article talked about a businessman who believed in investing in grassroots community programs. It mentioned his focus on after-school programs and adult education initiatives. It described his philosophy that the best way to help communities was to listen to what people actually needed, not just assume what they wanted. Then Lucy saw the photo. It was a professional headshot, the kind that appeared in corporate publications and annual reports. The man in the photo was wearing an expensive-looking suit and tie, and his hair was perfectly styled. But despite the formal setting and polished appearance, Lucy recognized that face immediately. It was Tom. Lucy stared at the photo, her coffee growing cold in her hands. This couldn't be right. The man in the picture was identified as Thomas Richardson, CEO and founder of Richardson Development Group, one of the largest real estate and community development companies in the region. She read the caption under the photo 3 times before it sank in. Thomas Richardson, known for his innovative approach to urban development and his commitment to community partnerships. The article mentioned that he was a single father who insisted on maintaining work-life balance to spend time with his young daughter. His daughter, Sophie. Lucy felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Tom, the tired-looking man in the rumpled suit who had seemed so genuinely grateful for his returned keychain, wasn't just any father. He was one of the most successful businessmen in the city. She kept reading, her hands shaking slightly as she turned the pages. The article described Richardson Development Group's latest projects, including affordable housing initiatives and community centers. It mentioned the company's revenue, which had several more zeros than Lucy had ever imagined seeing in one number. But what really got to her was the personal section of the article. It talked about how Thomas Richardson had started his company after growing up in a single-parent household, how he'd worked construction jobs to pay for college, and how his experiences had shaped his commitment to community development. Mr. Richardson believes that successful businesses have a responsibility to invest in the communities they serve, the article quoted. He's particularly passionate about creating opportunities for young people and supporting small business development. Lucy set the magazine down and stared out the window at the street where she'd found that keychain. Thomas Richardson, had walked down that same sidewalk, probably coming from some important business meeting, when he'd dropped the most precious thing he owned. And she'd been the one to find it. She thought back to their conversation at the coffee shop, how he'd listened so carefully when she talked about her community center idea, how interested he'd seemed in her plans, how he'd encouraged her to keep pursuing her dreams. All this time, she'd thought he was just a nice dad who was grateful to get his daughter's gift back. She'd had no idea she was talking to someone who actually had the power to make community centers happen, someone who built the exact kind of facilities she'd been dreaming about. The bell above the door chimed, snapping Lucy back to reality. Jake, her co-worker, walked in for the afternoon shift. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, tying his apron around his waist. "Everything okay?" Lucy held up the magazine, pointing to Tom's photo. "This guy was in here a couple of weeks ago. I returned his lost keychain." Jake glanced at the picture and whistled low. "Thomas Richardson? Seriously? You met the Thomas Richardson? You know who he is? Are you kidding? That guy's like a legend around here. My cousin worked on one of his housing projects last year. Said Richardson was the only developer he'd ever met who actually showed up at job sites to talk to the workers." Jake looked at the photo again. "What was he like?" "Normal," Lucy said, which felt like the most inadequate word in the world. "He seemed like just a regular dad who was worried about losing his daughter's Father's Day gift." "That's probably exactly what he is," Jake said. "Rich people are still people, you know. They still lose their keys and worry about disappointing their kids." Lucy nodded, but her mind was racing. She kept thinking about that $20 tip he'd left. At the time, it had seemed incredibly generous. Now she realized it was probably like pocket change to him, but the way he'd given it, the way he'd insisted she take it, there hadn't been anything condescending about it. He'd seemed genuinely grateful, not like someone throwing money around to show off. And the way he'd listened when she talked about her community center dream. He hadn't offered to help or made any big promises. He'd just listened and encouraged her to keep working toward her goal. The afternoon passed in a blur. Lucy went through the motions of serving customers and cleaning tables, but part of her mind stayed focused on the magazine article. She read it 2 more times during quiet moments, looking for any clues she might have missed about Tom's personality or character. The more she read, the more she realized that the man described in the article sounded exactly like the person she'd met in her coffee shop. Someone who cared about community, who believed in helping others, who understood what it meant to work hard for your dreams. By the time her shift ended, Lucy had made a decision. She wasn't going to contact Tom or try to reach out to him. What had happened between them, the lost keychain, their conversation, the connection they'd made, that had been real. It had been honest. And she didn't want to ruin that by making it about his money or his influence. But she was going to keep that magazine, and whenever she felt like her community center dream was too big or too impossible, she was going to look at that article and remember that sometimes the most successful people are the ones who still understand what it means to be grateful for small kindnesses. Walking home that evening, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about how much her perspective had changed in just one afternoon. The world suddenly felt full of possibilities she'd never considered before. Not because she'd met someone wealthy, but because she'd been reminded that dreams and success weren't as far apart as they sometimes seemed. 3 weeks had passed since Lucy discovered Tom's real identity, and she'd managed to push the knowledge to the back of her mind. She'd even stopped looking for his face in the crowd during her morning shifts. Life had thrown her enough curveballs lately without dwelling on chance encounters with successful businessmen. The latest curveball had arrived in the form of a certified letter the previous Friday. Her landlord was raising her rent by $300 a month starting next month. $300 she absolutely didn't have. Lucy had spent the weekend running numbers trying to figure out how to make it work. She could pick up more hours at the diner, maybe find a weekend job, but something more. We'll have to give, probably school. The thought made her stomach clench, but she was running out of options. Tuesday morning found her at Brewster's, going through the motions of the opening routine, while trying not to think about the conversation she'd need to have with her academic advisor. Maybe she could defer for a semester, work full-time, save up enough to get back on track. The morning rush was lighter than usual, which gave Lucy too much time to think. She was wiping down the espresso machine for the 3rd time when the door chimed. She looked up with her usual customer service smile, which froze on her face when she saw who was walking in. Thomas Richardson, was holding the hand of a little girl with curly brown hair and bright, curious eyes. The girl was maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a purple backpack and sneakers that lit up when she walked. Lucy's heart started racing. Why was he here? Had he somehow found out that she knew who he was? Was he angry that she hadn't mentioned it? But Tom's face showed nothing but warmth as he approached the counter. "Hi, Lucy, I hope you don't mind us dropping by. I wanted you to meet someone very special." He looked down at the little girl who was staring at Lucy with obvious curiosity. Grace, this is Lucy. She's the nice lady I told you about who found Daddy's keychain. Grace's face lit up like a Christmas tree. You're the one who found it. Daddy told me all about you. She bounced a little on her toes, making her sneakers flash. You saved my Father's Day present. Lucy felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was Sophie, no, Grace. The little girl whose careful handwriting she'd seen engraved on that keychain. It was my pleasure, sweetheart. I could tell it was very special to your dad. I saved up my allowance for 2 whole months, Grace said proudly. And I had to spell world's best dad like 5 times before they got it right on the back with my name. It's beautiful work, Lucy said, meaning every word. Your dad carries it everywhere. Tom's expression grew more serious, though still kind. Actually, that's part of why we're here. Grace has been wanting to meet you ever since I told her what happened, but I have another reason too if you have a few minutes to talk. Lucy glanced around the coffee shop. It was nearly empty except for Mrs. Patterson in her usual corner. Of course. Can I get you both something to drink first?
Hot chocolate for Grace?
Yes, please. Grace climbed onto one of the counter stools, swinging her legs. With extra whipped cream? Extra whipped cream coming right up. While Lucy prepared the drinks, hot chocolate for Grace and black coffee for Tom, she tried to calm her racing thoughts. He wanted to talk to her. This couldn't be a coincidence. Him showing up just when her world was falling apart. Grace chattered away while Lucy worked, telling her about school and her friends and how her dad had been so sad when he lost his keychain. He kept checking his pocket like maybe it would magically appear, she said, giggling. But then you found it and made everything better. Lucy set their drinks down and poured herself a coffee with shaking hands. So what did you want to talk about? Tom took a sip of his coffee and looked at her thoughtfully. I've been thinking about our conversation a few weeks ago. About your community center idea. Lucy's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. He was going to lecture her about being realistic, about how hard it would be, about how she needed to focus on more practical goals. But Tom surprised her. I did some research after we talked. Looked into your background, your work history, your academic record. Lucy stiffened. You investigated me? I wanted to understand who you are, Tom said gently. And everything I learned impressed me. Dean's List every semester despite working 2 jobs. Volunteer work at the Literacy Center. References from every employer that use words like reliable, hardworking, and genuinely cares about people. I don't understand why you would, because, Tom interrupted softly, I meet a lot of people in my business. People who want funding for projects. People who have big ideas and bigger dreams. But most of them start by telling me about their plans or their credentials or their connections. You started by returning something that didn't belong to you without asking for anything in return. Grace had been listening quietly, but now she spoke up. Daddy says you have a good heart. Lucy felt tears threatening. I just did what anyone would do. No, Tom said firmly. You did what you would do, and that tells me everything I need to know about your character. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. This is from the Richardson Foundation. It's a full scholarship to cover the rest of your degree, plus living expenses. Lucy stared at the envelope like it might explode. I can't accept that. There's more, Tom continued as if she hadn't spoken. We're also offering you a position as a community development intern with our company. 20 hours a week, flexible schedule around your classes. You'd be working directly with me on community center projects, learning how to turn those dreams of yours into reality. Mr. Richardson. Tom, he corrected. Tom, this is too much. I can't. Yes, you can. His voice was gentle but firm. Do you know what I was doing when I lost that keychain? Lucy shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. I was walking home from a meeting where I'd just approved funding for another generic community center. Same design as always, same program, same approach that isn't really reaching the people who need it most. Tom leaned forward slightly. But when you talked about your ideas, about really listening to what communities need, about creating spaces where parents and kids can learn together, that was different. That was exactly what I've been looking for. Grace pulled something out of her backpack, a homemade card with flowers drawn in crayon. I made this for you, she said shyly, sliding it across the counter. To say thank you for taking care of Daddy's present. Lucy opened the card with trembling fingers. Inside, in careful 3rd-grade handwriting, it said, Thank you for being nice to my daddy. He says nice people deserve nice things to happen to them. The tears Lucy had been holding back finally spilled over. She looked up to find Tom watching her with understanding in his eyes. Sometimes, he said quietly, the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest opportunities. You showed me that there are still people who do the right thing simply because it's right. Now let me show you what can happen when someone like that gets the chance to make their dreams come true. Lucy looked at the envelope, then at Grace's hopeful face, then at Tom's patient smile. For the first time in months, the future felt full of possibilities instead of obstacles. Okay, she whispered, then stronger. Okay, yes, thank you. Grace clapped her hands together, making her sneakers light up again. Daddy, does this mean Lucy's going to build the community center? Tom smiled, the same tired but hopeful expression Lucy remembered from that first morning. I think it means Lucy's going to build something even better than we ever imagined. And for the first time since she'd found that keychain on Maple Street, Lucy truly believed it too.